Off. So hi and welcome back to the live practices, part of Healing Solidarity. This is our penultimate live session, so I think it's the 7th one. And so this afternoon I am back with Agnes and we are talking money. And just to say something about Agnes before I hand over to her, and then I've also hidden it from my screen, so I'm going to do it from my memory. So Agnes is the founder of The Good Jungle, and she is also, I'm going to get it here we are, a trainer and facilitator, working on getting our minds, hearts and bodies in shape for social change. And the main place to find her is at thegoodjungle.org, or on Twitter and Facebook. Follow The Good Jungle and then you'll be in touch with Agnes. And obviously she's also been in our Facebook group this week and you can find her there too. So Agnes, welcome for the Exploring Money story session.
Oh, thank you, Marianne. Thanks for giving me a chance to introduce this work, which I feel really, really passionate about. And I have to say that in the past, at some point, there was a point in my life where talking about money made me incredibly uncomfortable, and it would be the last thing I wanted to talk about. So that's shifted quite significantly, and this is in huge parts due to someone called Peter Koenig, who I learned about this stuff from, and also another friend called Charles Davies, who has done a lot of work on Peter Koenig's work to articulate it, put it into practice and so on and so forth. So today I'm drawing massively on both of them, and I just want to acknowledge that right from the start. Also tell you that I have some notes here in front of me, which is a lot to do with time. So I usually do this stuff in a whole day or in hours or in just longer conversations with people. I just wanted to make sure I time myself. So I've got notes here. So if you see me looking down a lot, I'm staring at my notes. Money used to make me really uncomfortable, and that's changed a lot. The reason I want to talk about it here in this context at Healing Solidarity is that I've been getting a sense that very often money seems to be what gets in the way of the change we want to see, or it gets in the way of the career change we want to make, or the project we want to actually work on rather than the one we are working on, the work we want to do. It often seems to be in conflict with our deepest values. So there seems to be some kind of incongruence between how we act around money and what our values are. And that's a very common challenge, which is also really prevalent in this work and in the sector where we talk about donors and charity and philanthropy and fundraising and investing in this, that, or the other. And also, I think that when we talk about partners and beneficiaries, there's often an implicit money story in there, in the sense that we're talking about shifting resources to people when people speak of beneficiaries, or whatever other word you want to use, because beneficiaries is for obvious reasons not such a great term. Let's talk about this thing we call money. It actually really amazes me. It's something that everybody knows. Everyone in the world seems to know what money is, maybe with the exception of very, very few people living cut off for civilization, or what we call civilization, in some rainforest. But basically everybody knows money. Everybody knows how to use it, and that also is a miracle. It's more universal than language. My friend Charlie, who works on this, said no one has ever managed to invent a universal mobile phone charger, but we have money as this thing that we can use everywhere, so that's quite a miraculous phenomenon. But what is it really? Like, what is money? And that's a question that I put to you yesterday in the Facebook page. One person said it was an enabler. Is anyone here who would like to tell me what they think money is?
So maybe I was going to say to people, if you want to put your kind of instinctive response to that in the comments, we could also see that. What is money to me in this moment? Money is, I just want to say helpful, and money is a enabler has stuck in my mind. Someone else's, right? Is stuck in my mind. An enabler, and then also attention.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Attention.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Not attention, as in
attention, as in tension with a T. T for tension. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So lots of people say money is an enabler. Many people say money is security, money is freedom. I often hear money is a trap. I hear money is an obstacle. Money is dangerous. Money is power. Money is a tool for exchange. I often hear a means of exchange. But also really, I've heard quite out there things about money. What was the craziest one I've heard? I don't know. But yeah, there's basically all these different things we think money is. Someone's just posted saying money is a commonly agreed exchange mechanism. Yeah, so it's a means of exchange. So when you go round and round asking lots and lots of people what money is, you'll hear almost everything there is under the sun. There will be contradictions and there will be patterns, but there's kind of this myriad of things we think money can be. And often these things are sort of, they seem opposed to each other. So if one person says money is security, another person will say money makes me feel unsafe, or money is insecurity. If one person says money is an enabler, someone else will say money is an obstacle. If somebody says money is freedom, someone else will say money is a trap. So it seems to be everything. And that's true. So there are two ways we can look at money. And basically, we can think of that in the same way as we look at a mirror. So when you look at a mirror and you look into it, you can see all sorts of things. You can say, oh, hello, this is great. Or you can say, oh, God, who are you? But you kind of, you will see various things in a mirror. And the first way of looking at a mirror is you see what's in the mirror and you respond to that. And the second way is you look at the mirror and you see that there's a mirror. So you wonder what the mirror actually is, the mirror itself, rather than what you see in the mirror. So in a way, that's what distinguishes us from maybe a small child. A small child will look at a mirror and not recognize that the mirror is there. It will think there is that other person over there in the mirror and all these other things, or some animals will as well. And in a way, that's how we look at money. We look at money and we think it's this thing. But when we dig down, money as a coin, a piece of paper, basically, a banknote or a number in a computer, basically ones and zeros and light in a virtual system. All of these things, when you drill down on them, they aren't really there. They're basically things we project. They're superstitions. So it never actually is anything other than what we project onto it. It's basically like a mirror. And so we project onto the mirror what we see in it. And what I'm trying to do here is basically make us, turn us from cats and dogs and infants who look at mirrors and think they see what's in the mirror, to use our human consciousness, which we have, to look at the mirror and see that there is a mirror. And recognize the power that comes with that, the power that we have of deciding what stories we project onto that mirror. So what's this projecting business I keep talking about? It's basically so this work is grounded in the psychology of Carl Gustav Jung, who worked on projections and shadows by saying that the human psyche is split between a conscious and an unconscious psyche. And the conscious part of our psyche is everything that we know about ourselves. So I know I am this and I am that, and I behave like this and I behave like that. This is what makes me. And there's an unconscious part of the psyche, and that's where we push everything that we either don't want to be or we don't give ourselves permission to be. So these things can be positive or negative things, but we push all sorts of parts of ourselves into that unconscious. And we then go and project that onto outside of us. We project that onto other people. We can project that onto a job title. We can project that onto all sorts of things. And we can project that onto money. So all those unconscious stories about ourselves, things we either push away or we kind of cling to unconsciously, we push away. And what we call the money work, of which the Money Life Story is a part, is basically all about becoming more conscious of what's in that unconscious space, becoming more conscious of those stories that we unconsciously tell ourselves about money, and we become more conscious of how these stories play out in our lives and in our work, in our organizations, in our relationships, in our transactions with people. And secondly, we can change these stories. We can, once we're aware of them, we have the power to change that narrative. We can actually challenge it, and we can decide ourselves what stories we want the money to tell. So this is what this process is about. So we can stop treating money like this force of nature, like this thing that really exists, and instead really live it as what it really is, which is a fabrication of our minds and a fabrication of humanity. We've created it ourselves. So today I can't take you all the way through that process, but I can take you through the first step of it, which is becoming more conscious of the stories that you tell yourself about money, consciously or unconsciously. So there's this thing we call your money life story. And if you have pen and paper, that will be really, really useful. If you don't, and if it would be a hassle to get some, don't worry about it. You can also do this just in silence, reflecting. You don't have to write anything down. You're also welcome to use the chat window and type stuff in there if you're here with us now. But you know, some of these stories or these reflections that you'll have may be quite private, so there's no pressure on you to share them. But yeah, take a moment to just travel back in time through your life to when you were a child, and try and remember, what was your earliest memory of money? What's the earliest thing? What's the earliest memory you have of money somehow showing up in your life? And so I'm just going to continue probing that with a few questions. So you can continue writing and thinking as I ask these questions. How did money show up? In what form and in which situation? And what did that situation tell you about what money is? How did that situation make you feel about money? And how did that make you feel about yourself? So I'll leave you to do this for a few moments.
Agnes, could you repeat the questions for me, because I want to type them in here for people.
So the overarching question is, what is your earliest memory of money? Mm-hmm. And more specifically, to help a bit with what I'm getting at, is how did money show up?
Yeah.
In what form? In what context? What was the story around that?
Hold on.
Yeah. Sorry, you're typing.
Yeah, I got it.
And how did that context, how did that scenario, that memory, that situation, how did that situation make you feel about money? How did that situation make you feel about money?
Got it. Thank you.
And how did that make you feel about yourself?
Yeah. Okay.
So we'll just take a few moments to give you time to reflect on that. So you're welcome to continue reflecting on this question, but in the meantime, I'm just going to take it to the next step. And Marianne, if you want to type the questions up, I'll do it slowly. So I was just going to invite you to continue reflecting on how money then continued to show up in your life. So if there are any big moments around money in your life, any sort of pivotal memories. So to give you an example, I have a pretty visceral memory around money when I think I was 11 or 12, and my father was made redundant and came home from work, and I knew that it meant, a potential time without income on his part, and that was really scary. So I felt quite scared and worried because I didn't know what it meant. Or for some people, it's the first time they earned money, how that made them feel. So just think about sort of those big moments where maybe your narrative around money was challenged or changed, or something big happened that made you think deeply about it. And again, the question is here, what did that make you think about money? How did that make you feel about money? And ultimately, how did it make you feel about yourself? So there are various levels of detail you can take this to, and if you're watching the recording and you don't feel done, you can also hit pause here and continue. When I do this when this is sort of done in a days on a weekend workshop, or when I've asked people one-to-one these questions, we take more time over them, and it's usually a longer conversation than this. So if you're here with us live, then it's a way of dipping your toe into that question right now. But yeah, so reflecting on sort of how money has shown up in your life and how that made you feel about money and how that made you feel about yourself. Come into the present moment, into your life right now, and have a think about money, how money shows up in your life right now. What is money right now? How does it make you feel? So a good way to find out about that is to think about some questions like, are you comfortable asking for money? Are you comfortable receiving money? Are you more comfortable giving money away? Or maybe neither. Maybe both make you feel uncomfortable. Spending it, receiving it, asking for it. So all of these things can give you clues if you tune into how that makes you feel. And sometimes the answer is in our bodies before it's in our heads. It can give you a clue. Peter Koenig, the person I learned about all of this from, he sometimes takes literal money, like a big stash of it, and holds it up in front of people and says, how do you feel about this? How would you feel if I gave all of this to you? Or if I just burnt it right now, here and on the spot, how would that make you feel? And all of these imaginations give us quite visceral reactions sometimes, and those reactions give us clues to what story we are telling ourselves about it. So yeah, think about how it shows up in your life now. And you can take that from your private life into your professional life as well, and think about, maybe don't necessarily have to write it all down, but just think about how that manifests then in your work when you're having to deal with money. So yeah, think about how it shows up in your life now. And so the next thing to do with all of this is to go back through your story and have a look and filter it with the question, or with sort of the sentence, money is ... in my life. Or money made me feel ... So when I first did this, for example, for me, money was something that made me feel angry and also guilty. And that came from a story where one of my earliest memories of money was my grandmother used to often give me a bit of pocket money when I went to see her. But it then became this expectation that when I see my grandmother, she will give me some money. And that became a feeling of guilt, because I felt like when I went to see her, I felt like, am I going because I have an expectation of pocket money? And, imagine this is sort of 5-6-year-old me. Am I going with the expectation of pocket money? Am I going to see my grandmother? How are these things linked? How are love and money linked? And then often the feeling of guilt, walking away with a little coin in my pocket, made me feel guilty. And in later years made me feel angry. But yeah, sort of that was one of my earlier clues around guilt. And then the story with my father, who was made redundant at one point, there was something about money and safety. So for me at that point, money felt like I need money. My family need money to be secure and safe. So those are just some examples to give you some clues as to what I'm after. And if you need some, I don't know how easy this is to do, but I was just going to say, if you needed some, if you had something you wanted to share and needed some sort of help with, I have this sort of story and I can't figure out what that means in terms of money, you're very welcome to pop it in the chat window. I'm screening that as I'm talking. I also appreciate that that's can be quite sensitive. So I'm here on this Facebook group in the next few days. You can find me here. You can send me a message, and we can talk about that too. So that's an offer also for people who are maybe watching this not live. And so I wanted to tell you a couple things. Firstly, that when I ask about your earliest memory of money, that's obviously our earliest conscious memory. And what Peter Koenig actually says is that probably the earliest experience with money that actually shaped us in some way and shaped how we feel and think about money for most people goes back way earlier than we actually can remember. So it can be around the age of 1.5. Often when we take small children around town and maybe they want to have a banana and they grab it from the grocer, from the green grocer, and we say, no, put that down, we need to first pay for it. And then we go up and give some coins or maybe hand the cards to a person behind the till. That can be a first memory that gets imprinted on a child in terms of money means I can't have what I want right now. I have to wait, for example. It's just a one story, but maybe a quite common one. And I've felt quite conscious of that in the last year as my son was 1.5 to 2.5 years old, and I've seen him react to money in ways that are quite different to other things. He knows that money is different from paper. He'll pick it up and put it in his pocket when he sees it on the floor because he knows it means something. So obviously there's already something being imprinted on him about money, and he won't remember this as a grown-up. And so as you go through what you've picked up about what money is, you will notice that there are some themes to it. So there can be what we call positive projections onto money. So when the story about money you have is a positive story, like money is security, money gives me freedom, it gives me agency, it's an enabler, it's power, if we have a positive sense of power attached to that. So there are these positive projections, and there are negative stories we tell about money, like my sort of guilty story. Money means I'm guilty. Money is somehow, what was it? It's something kind of, money was kind of dirty in a way. It was kind of something that's icky and mustn't be touched. Money is a trap. Money is the devil. Money is power when it's considered coercive and negative power. Money is an obstacle. Somebody once said money is the graveyard of creativity. There are all these different stories we tell. And so when we have positive projections onto money, when we tell positive stories about it, the result of that will be that we unconsciously, when these positive projections are completely sort of driving us unconsciously, then we will be grasping for it, we'll be running after it, and we'll be trying to accumulate it. And when those stories are predominantly negative, we'll be maybe unconsciously pushing it away. So when somebody gives us money, we'll say no thanks, or when we're asked to donate, we'll give more rather than less. And it's kind of this kind of trying to get rid of money because we kind of unconsciously want to push it away from us. Quite a few people are more mixed, so that's what Peter calls a washing machine. It's when it sort of goes both ways. You're grasping, but you're also pushing it away at the same time because you have positive and negative stories about money driving you. And so, as I said before, this work really is about becoming conscious of that to begin with, and then with remembering that money is nothing other than a mirror of our own stories, maybe our own individual stories, but also the collective stories we tell about money, if you think about this more politically and more systemically. To remember that we have the power to reframe that story, we have the power to reframe that narrative. And by retelling those stories, we can really unleash the creativity we need to resolve different challenges without getting stuck or somehow steered from behind in an autopilot kind of way by the money. So it's a way of taking back control. It's a way of taking responsibility as well. It's a way of becoming really creative And it's also a way of actually healing the relationships we have with ourselves and with other people, because we're not sort of driven by these unconscious stories of guilt and anger and security and insecurity and so on and so forth. So the second part of this practice of the money work, which I'm not going to go into much detail today, because that's work best done in person. But you can, I'm going to introduce it a little bit, you can challenge yourself a little bit. So if you find the stories that you have about money in your money life story, you can just try and challenge yourself to reframe the narrative and to tell yourself what maybe currently feels like a lie. So if there is a positive story about money, like money means security, you can try to tell yourself, I can be secure with and without money. And it'll feel like a complete lie, because in your life, to be secure is you need money. But if you just entertain the possibility that you can be secure without money, suddenly you'll find all sorts of ways, most likely, to be secure without money. You'll be freer to think about that, because you're removing that narrative. Or if it's a negative story, like the story I was telling myself in relation to money was, I'm guilty, or I'm a sneaky something. It was basically being sneaky because I rocked up at my grandmother's with this kind of second agenda to see her, and also I really wanted that little shiny coin she gave me every time, which made me feel like a sneaky, I don't know, a cheat or something. So you can also try and tell yourself the story that that's okay. And if you entertain the possibility that it's okay to be a cheat, it'll move that sort of story, that unconscious story, from I'm a cheat, which for years and years and years was in my unconscious and made me feel incredibly uncomfortable and icky and guilty around money. It removes that from the shadow, from the unconscious, and brings it into your awareness and makes you feel freed up in a way. That enables you to deal with money in a much more creative way. So, yeah, I just want to invite you to entertain the possibility that these lies are true, and see what that does for you. Because, as I said before, it's just a mirror for the stories that we tell ourselves collectively and individually. It's almost like a superstition that we hold, that money is this or is that. And when we look at the various different stories we hear about it, we can see how many different ones there are. And it does seem like money is kind of everything and none of these things. So that's because it's a mirror. And yeah, I think it's really important to take this awareness into the work that we do. What stories does the money tell in the relationships that we have between different actors in this work? And are those stories of fear and coercion, or are those stories of creativity and enablement and change? Are those stories of we're just kind of trying to not rattle the system too much, or are those stories of we're completely turning this thing on its head? And to become able to do that really starts with our own awareness of our own story, and with our own effort to change that narrative. So I'm going to stop here, Marianne, for now.
Cool.
I'm wondering if you have questions, or if anyone else had any questions, reactions, thoughts, reflections on what I've said.
Yeah, let me just put that, please, Phil. I was just thinking about use in organisations. Or like for people thinking about money in the context of fundraising and philanthropy and the sort of the money in our work in the sector. I'm just sort of thinking about how an example of how you might see this in that sort of professional or organisational context, either working or just sort of being applicable for people. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I can try and give a bit of an insight into how this work can pan out when it's done within in an organizational context. So it always begins with people. So we're kind of trying, when you do this work in an organizational context, you're kind of trying to get to grips with what are the money stories that are playing out in here.
Yeah.
But never forgetting that they can only ever come from people. There is no sort of, sphere of non-humanness where that sort of lives, but it's really brought in and held by people. And usually one of the predominant money story that sort of runs through an organization and its work is the story of its founder, the money story of its founder, or the person who's kind of holding that sort of creative vision for the organization. And that their money stories, especially when they're unconscious, can be quite pervasive and have quite deep consequences for how money shows up in the organization. It can be, it can show up in its bank balance, for example, in whether or not they're sort of running after it or pushing it away. So, if it's enough to look at the banking sector and think of the money stories that prevail there, and that kind of gives you an insight into the accumulation that's happening there. And so when you work with an organization, you kind of try and find out what the sort of the predominant story is of the person that holds that creative vision and holds that edge, but also of the people that work within the organization, and how that kind of fits together and how that frames the relationship between people. Often when they realize that they have, a positive projection onto money that makes them run after it or cling to it, and in other cases, negative projections that make people feel really uncomfortable about money and not wanting to talk about it, when they come to this work, they go like, that's why. And then different conversations about it become possible, and it's kind of a lightness becomes possible that creates more ease and space and creativity around money, so that you can work better with it and you can work better without it as well. So that, we don't stop thinking about this thing that we'd really love to do at the point when we start thinking about the money, because we no longer believe that it's necessarily going to stop us. Once we tell ourselves a different story around it, we can very often find much more creative ways around that blockage, and find alternative ways to resource what we want to do. Also, I have to say, often, when you do this work with individuals, people in an organization, it's really deep and personal work.
Yeah.
So it can become quite tender. And it can be painful to surface some of these stories. So you really need to create a safe space for those conversations to happen. And very often some kind of deeply sad and sometimes traumatic stories about people will surface from people. But that then again links it with the healing, because when that stuff is in the unconscious, it's kind of doing its work.
Yeah.
But without you having any control and agency over it. So it's about bringing it to the foreground so that we can be more choiceful in how we work with that.
Right. Great. Thanks, Agnes. I was thinking of, I hear so often this thing, particularly in larger INGOs, around like the conflict between like programs and fundraising, kind of like the money people and the program people. And without going into all of that in any depth, I think it'd be really interesting to use this sort of model to surface some of that in organisations, because I think it feels like a very common blockage in the way of some of the aspirations that we've talked about in the conference around moving things forward, so it's just a reflection.
This is really, from my point of view, what I'm saying now is really anecdotal. It's not in any way, quantified and studied and substantiated in that way. But just from my experiences speaking to people around me, my experience of doing this kind of process and money work with people working in the sector, there is, I think, a high prevalence of people who have a predominantly negative story around money in areas where we're dealing with sort of activism around around global issues. And I'm not saying that's exclusively the case. There will be people with various different stories, but I keep getting the sense there's often people who have this kind of thing of money is bad. It's this kind of inconvenient thing I kind of need to work with so that I can do what I want to do and that we can make the change happen that we want to see happening. But it's kind of icky. We don't really want to talk about it. And then when within an organization that perhaps comes into contact with a team of people who are much more enthusiastic about money and much more believe in its positive role, that can create a difference in money culture or money stories. That can be a conflict. But when you surface these conversations, when you surface these stories, it becomes a different conversation. That can be really interesting. Yeah, and it's to do. I mean, these stories shape our values as well. So different kinds of values are presented in different ways in different parts of organization. So perhaps where in one place people are more around being pragmatic and getting stuff done, where in other places people are more about sticking with the cause and the integrity, even when that means not getting it done. That can grate and create conflict.
Right, yeah. Cool. So thank you so much.
Just want to repeat. I'm floating about on the Facebook group. If people want to talk about this more, I'm aware for lots of people this is quite a different, a new way of talking about money. Also hard to do justice in just under an hour. But yeah, I'm here for more conversation.
So if people want to get in touch with you, but in the comments or directly, right, in the message in the Facebook group.
So my email address is hello@thegoodgeneral.org.
Cool.
So
Great. Thank you so much, Agnes, for sharing that with us, and I welcome people to be in touch with you around it as well.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Marianne.
Okay.
Take care.
Just hold on a minute. It takes me a minute to.
So you stop the